Good afternoon and welcome to JumpStart's monthly expert-led webinar series. Today with Gabriel Fey on considering and navigating the architecture process for growing your business. I'm Tylin Nash, the Learning Center Media Coordinator at JumpStart's Verizon Centers, and I'll be handling today's Q&A. JumpStart strives to provide you with access to the knowledge and resources you need to make your small business bigger and better. Visit our website to explore some of our other educational opportunities for small business and tech companies. Before I introduce our presenter today, a few housekeeping items. This presentation session will be 60 to 90 minutes with time set aside for Q&A. Our presenter may ask you to participate throughout, so please place your comments in the chat. Please make sure your responses are going to everyone, not just hosts and panelists. You may need to make the selection in chat. You can also see the Q&A, which is a great place to put your questions as they occur to you, and we can ensure we can address them at the end. At the end of today's session and in a follow-up email, you will receive the slides, the recording, and any additional resources relevant to the webinar and a brief survey. We appreciate your feedback as it allows us to continue to bring experts and entrepreneurs valuable lessons. And without further ado, let me introduce our presenting subject matter expert today. Gabriel Fey is Principal and Chief Executive Officer at HSB and has been with the company since 2012. Gabriel designs and manages projects across all major sectors throughout the United States, specializing in corporate office, food and beverage, and retail/hospitality. He focuses on presenting clientele with high-level design while simultaneously coordinating between all necessary participants to ensure the best desired outcome is achieved. He believes that the user experience with any given space is critical to establishing a productive, healthy, and inspiring mindset. I think Gabriel will bring a wealth of knowledge, so I hope you will tune in and prepare specific questions that apply to you and your business. Gabe, welcome, and over to you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. All right, so as Tylin alluded to, if everyone wants to put any questions in the chat, I know we have a little bit more intimate group here, so if you want to throw out your area of expertise or any questions you have as you go through, or maybe any particular scenarios that you may come up with as I'm presenting, feel free to put them in the chat. I'll try to address everything as I can. I will share screen now. And we can get started. So as I alluded to before, we can do a formal Q&A at the end, but this can be relatively conversational. If something comes up, please feel free to share it in the chat or kind of raise your hand and put it in the Q&A. I'll rely on Tylin and Lauren to kind of put those on my radar as I'm presenting to make sure I'm not missing anything. Or if I do miss anything or don't get to it specifically at that time, we can definitely cover it at the end. So as we alluded to, the topic of today is, planning, designing, and thriving. It's basically managing that process of architecture for growing your business. There can be a lot of growing pains, as you may know or may come to know potentially with where you're at. So hopefully this will help shed some light on that, and hopefully it's productive for you. So as we alluded to, I had a brief introduction there, a little bit of context just on HSB, my firm, along with some of the other partners here. We are based out of Cleveland, Ohio. We work completely out of Cleveland, Ohio. We do work across the country. We are registered in all 50 states for some of our national clients, but our heart is certainly here in Cleveland, and that's where we operate out of. So more than happy to kind of field questions after, if anything comes up, a week from now. Please feel free to reach out. You'll have my contact information, both in the presentation and from the follow-up from the JumpStart crew. Okay, so where to start? I'm going to start with some jargon, some industry jargon, which, a lot of industry people always like to throw around jargon. And then when you're not hip to it, you kind of feel like you're lost in meetings, or you can kind of easily be confused. So there's a lot of industry jargon to digest. Hopefully I address them throughout the presentation. I don't gloss over them. So please feel free to call me out if I kind of say an acronym or something that doesn't make sense. But I have a few initial slides here just to showcase some of the verbiage that you may come across as you start to navigate the process of design and architecture and acquiring a new space or expanding in a new space. But rather than just kind of read through a glossary, I've kind of collated them based on general segments. And I'm going to briefly go through them now, but then at the end, we can circle back and maybe address any terms that people have questions on or inquiries on, just to make sure we cover all the bases. So it can be a little overwhelming. Even here, as I'm looking, the general AE terms in our industry, that's architecture and engineering. So if we say AE or if we'll say ID, that could be interior design. So the AE industry, that's kind of what that means. A few things that you'll come across during, dealings with your broker or leasing. Here's a few terms here. Again, we'll get into these specifics so you can kind of have a better understanding as we go through. Right sizing. So as we talk about trying to find your fit and how much space you need, what type of space you need, where does it need to go, how does it need to be separated? These are some of the terms that you'll find kind of floating around as you deal with people in the industry. So again, we'll get into those more in the weeds. Types of space, you'll see a variety of, I'm not sure if everyone's primarily office space here. We certainly have experience in all kind of sectors. So if you have specific questions outside of the office realm, like warehouse or industrial spaces, I can field those as best as I can. The most of the presentation will skew a little bit towards office space, but the process and the overall, takeaways are still pretty much the same with a few nuances depending on your sector or your specialty. Project phases, you'll see some flow charts as we go through to help give you a sense of, A, B, C, D, the order of operations, how things will kind of progress through. And then talking about, budget monies, how those are going to be allocated, how's that going to be spent, and all the nuances behind that. Here's some terms that you'll see that we can kind of revisit at the end. Okay, so where to start? You're obviously working on growing your businesses. You have startups and new ideas. So we need to start to figure out where are we going to go. It can all be very overwhelming at first. And so before you know exactly who to engage with, there's going to be some telltale signs or some impetus of why you need to start to assemble a team to help you navigate your architectural process to really get a new space. So here's a list of few things that we have as clients come to us or have come to us in the past, some of the impetus for them of why they need to revisit or rethink the space that they have. So I'll go through a few examples just so you can kind of have these things on your radar. Rapid growth and loss, that's obviously probably the most apparent one. As you're potentially gaining a lot of new staff, growing your employee base, you obviously have physical needs that need to respond to that. So that's a more straightforward one. You're kind of bursting at the seams. You need more space. You need different space. That's a key telltale sign. On the flip side, maybe downsizing is also, even though you're losing space, it may still require an architect to help you re-demise or shrink your space, or even potentially move to a new space that's smaller so that you can keep your rent rates down and more in tune with what your budget is. So growth or loss can be a direct impact to why you need to start this process. Another reason could be a change in your business plan as you start to shift or pivot as you see best based on your business plan. That may have direct impacts to your office conditions or the type of space that you need to either make a widget or house your staff, house yourself, host clients, any myriad things. So any kind of change or as you evolve, that may inherently require new, different, or a different size space that you may need to start this process with. Another application that may be pretty common for everybody here would be a merger or an acquisition. A couple different ways this can manifest itself. More for if you are acquired potentially, you may be in a scenario where you're actually being integrated into an existing firm or company that has standards or has requirements, or maybe they already have a real estate portfolio that you would be shifting into, that you would have to kind of respond to that request. Or if you are merging, or you could potentially be joining forces with another company or another employees or staff that you have to mitigate, where you're going to go, how you're going to integrate and collaborate and maintain a brand or create a new brand, and what that means for your office culture. In the post-COVID era, back to office is kind of coming back now. Initially, it was everybody kind of fleeing and working from home, which is still very much a reality. It's a new reality. There's never this condition of kind of going back to the way it was, because we all just move forward. Things are certainly different. So it was a big shift after COVID, how everyone was working from home. That had a big impact on the amount of office space and then also the type of office space that we use. So now I think more people are starting to come back into the office, maybe 3 days a week, potentially 4 days a week. So that has shifted the demand for the space requirements that are needed. And it has also shifted the quality of space that is needed. So you have to compete as business owners. You're trying to attract talent and retain talent. You are needing to create a reason for someone to not only work from home, but want to come into the office. So working from home can be very convenient, but there's obviously obvious advantages to working in the office, collaborating with each other, being present, not being distracted, and kind of having a synergistic culture to the way you work. So you'll see some of those reasonings for needing new or different office space. Another piece is consistent pain points. That could be a good reason. I know my firm is kind of currently experiencing this. We're growing. We're almost about 40 people now. And these are more like day-to-day nuisances that you may start to pick up on. So an example that we come across often, we operate in kind of one large open office area with open cubicles. And we constantly are hosting calls, taking conference calls, taking private calls, and it can be very challenging, even just from an audio standpoint, or just overlapping with people. So we're constantly breaking out, trying to find small rooms and conference rooms to meet and host in. And as we've grown, we've realized that's been kind of coming cumbersome on our day-to-day activities. So that would be a telltale sign of, okay, something needs to change, whether it's more space or reconfigured space. Something needs to help optimize that to make sure your workflow is not impacted. Location or relocation. You may be growing, or your demand or your talent may be shifting, and you want a particular location to help attract or retain that staff base. So the location itself could be critical, meaning going to a new building, a new city, a new location that's better for your operations or your production. And the last one we have would be forecasting. So not only what are your conditions that you need now, but as you'll see as we go through some of the slides, the timeline that it kind of takes, you have to be able to think, obviously as an entrepreneur should, but have to be able to think a year, 5 year, 10 years out. A typical lease term would be 5 years or 10 years. They can all be negotiated, but that's kind of a typical rule of thumb that you'll see. So what does that mean for your future and your company's future as you are potentially going out for seed funding or Series A, having to know what quantity of money you're going to need to kind of capture, how much space is going to be needed, and what does that translate to in terms of dollars. So these are all good reasonings for knowing that you need to start the process of assembling a team to help you get across the finish line of creating a new office space for your team. Okay, so now that you've realized that something needs to be done with your current conditions, you need to assemble the team. Here is a very simplified kind of flow chart or diagram of the main players that may be involved. They may not all be involved, but this is kind of a very traditional, typical scenario that may be, tweaked person to person or company to company. So in general, you have the client, which is obviously you. And one of the first point of contacts that you'll likely have is a broker, a real estate broker. In layman terms, it's basically, if you were looking to buy a house, you have to engage a realtor, and the broker is essentially your realtor, but in the commercial realm. They have boutique brokers, they have larger broker firms that are, national, global, and everything in between. The next piece would be an architect or designer like myself, that will get into the responsibilities of what we would do and how we would help facilitate your needs. And then lastly, what I have in kind of the yellowish orange that's dashed in a little bit would be an owner's rep. And that may not necessarily pertain to everybody, but I wanted to make sure I pointed it out from the standpoint of an owner's rep is really there to represent your behalf to all the other players. So as we get into adding general contractors and landlords and all these other teams, the owner's rep really helps take your position. They can offer expertise if they're, if they've been around the block and they know this. And then they can also act on your behalf. The focus for a lot of young entrepreneurs and startups should really be growing the business, focusing on the business to making sure that succeeds. So sometimes it could be too cumbersome for you to also take on daily meetings, weekly meetings, visiting a bunch of different office spaces, having design sessions with an architect and going through programming needs, dealing with contracts. A lot of that can be very, very cumbersome. So if you're not able to, or you don't have an internal team that's able to manage that process, you can engage an owner's rep to help lighten that burden and basically stand in your place and host all these meetings and then kind of report back to you with a consolidated report of, okay, here's what we did over the past week or month. This is what needs to be done. Here's the decisions, and they can kind of boil it down to you. So I wanted to make sure I pointed that out because that's a common situation that we do see with some of our clients. So for now, we're going to start focusing on with the broker, since that would really be kind of the first step in the process. As you look around for spaces, the broker is the one who's really going to help understand your initial needs and general items like your location that you're looking in, the type of space, whether it's warehouse space, office space, medical space. They will have an expertise and a specialty that they're able to provide and help manage that process for you. Just the same way that if you were looking for a new home, you would have a realtor. You would tell them, hey, I need a 3-bedroom. I like to cook. I need a kitchen. I need storage space. You kind of give them that list, and then they would have their expertise because they have their ear to the ground and they're privy to all the nuances of the market, basically. So here's some examples of local brokers that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. The architecture and engineering industry, we have a very synergistic and close relationship with brokers, as you'll understand why as we go through this a little bit more. So some of these are local, and then they also have larger national preferences or reaches as well. So getting into a little bit more specifics on the broker side of things. So they do have specialized teams. So as a client comes to them, depending on the needs, they likely have a dedicated team for what that is. So if you're needing office space, they have everyone in town who's familiar with commercial office space, high rise, mid rise, suburban office locations, downtown locations. They have a team that's very, very privy and dialed into all of that. If it's retail, whether it's a franchise model or just a boutique type retail, they have all of those special teams that they would basically assign you, and you would help work with them to find what you need. So you can see some of the sectors that they typically specialize in: office, industrial, medical, retail, housing and multifamily, leisure, resort, hotel type setups, data centers, self-storage. That really covers probably 99% of the sectors that, and most likely people would fall underneath that. Additionally, they help basically manage portfolios. So not only would they help you find other spaces, they may also own property that they're also looking to lease, looking to sell, and acquire, and help you acquire and manage that leasing negotiation process. So they have all of that information backed on hand. The other piece for more strategic decisions that need to be made, they have a lot of some of the larger broker houses. They have massive amounts of kind of metadata that they've been able to scrape. that they're able to really help influence and improve some of the decisions that you're able to make. So rather than you just trying to fly by the seat of your pants and decide, well, I like Ohio City, maybe let's have an office space there, or maybe that would be good for my new pizza shop that I'm opening, or whatever that entity is. They are able to give you the basis, the data that really helps support, okay, well, 80% of people actually are doing this in this area, so you should really focus on this portion or this neighborhood or this city. An example would be they manage a Dunkin' Donuts, and Dunkin' Donuts is their client. They come to them and say, hey, I'm going to open 44 locations in the Midwest over the next 5 years. Help me find out where those are going to be. And it goes all the way to the point where they can use cell phone data to track, suburban moms with 3 kids travel down this intersection and make a right 80% of the time on the morning days. So that would be the best place for a drive-through. So it can get really, really nuanced, and they can really have a lot of helpful information that could be pretty critical to where you need to land your space. Additionally, the broker will help you with financing, understanding what finances are going to be required, and then also they can help you set up a pro forma that you can help build out. So if you're talking about a 5-year lease, what is that going to mean to your bottom line for your monthly finances? How are you going to be able to strategically handle that as you're growing your business? They can help give the insight on all of that. And then lastly, the actual negotiations, once you do land on a building or a space, they're able to help you with the negotiations on your behalf to say, okay, this is the deal that makes sense. These are the terms and conditions that we're going to agree to. It's always a give and take a little bit. You never take the first offer kind of mentality. You ask for as much as you can. That's still within reason. That still works within your budget. So that's, in a very quick nutshell, what they're able to offer and provide. And these are pretty critical decisions, and that's the advantage that a broker does bring to the table. They do operate typically off of like a percentage fee of the deal, but it's oftentimes money well spent for sure, because they have a very specialized expertise. Okay, so going back to assembling the team, now we will start to focus on, my specialty, the architect and the designer. As I mentioned, there is a lot of overlap between us and the broker and interacting with the clients, at least on the initial front end of everything. So as you are going through, make sure you are interviewing several brokers, several architecture firms, making sure that it's a good fit. At the end of the day, it's a relationship that you need to be comfortable with. You need to make sure that there's a sense of transparency and openness. Communication feels right. There's a certain level of excitement and thought-provoking going on to make sure that you're getting what you want at the end of the day. So it is very common to ask around, get word of mouth recommendations, and make sure you feel comfortable after talking to maybe a couple of each of these team players. We always like to say at HSB, someone may only deal with an architect once in their entire life, once or twice, maybe, let's say, in their entire life, or maybe not even at all. So it is a very unique experience that we take to heart. So we want to make sure that we are providing for you and making sure that our clients get what they need. So you want to make sure you feel comfortable with the team that you're assembling as you go through. As far as, sorry, I was just checking the chat, make sure we're good. Okay. This is a very, very broad snapshot of the entirety of the process that we're going to get to kind of each of these segments in more detail, but I at least wanted to present this up front to give you a sense of context. So what you see kind of in the center dark blue area is really the bulk of where the architect is going to come into play. The due diligence side of things is where the broker is going to help do the heavy lifting, kind of due diligence and fit planning. So at the front end of the process is where the broker will really be involved. And then as things shift along, the architect will really start to become the primary lead and point of contact for you to help manage through fit planning, construction documents, and contract administration. Again, I'll get into the specifics of what that means, but just know that we'll do the heavy lifting here. And then the general contractor will take into place, and kind of as it goes towards the end of the process, it'll go through there. So the initial phase, that when the broker gets involved, is what we would call the due diligence phase. So that's where they would be helping you vet through a variety of different buildings, different situations, different locations, square footage types. They would be helping you vet through all of that. And at the same time, that is when they would, or you would, engage an architect to start going into the fit planning phase. So what starts with that is what we would call programming. I know that's a very broad term, especially when you're talking with tech people and everything. But in the design realm and the architecture and the A&E industry, programming are the pieces and parts that make up a company. So when we come to the table, we say, okay, what are you looking for? What are your requirements? What program do you have that's associated with your company and with your space needs? So what that means basically is, in a very oversimplified version, I know that I need 4,000 square feet. I need 5 offices, 5 open office workstations, 2 conference rooms, a receptionist, and a break room. Those are the program requirements that are brought to the table. And that's the ammo that the architect needs to help draw up and showcase the space to make sure that you fit and get the square footage and the fit that you need. So a lot of times in a simplified version like that, a client may come to us already knowing that information. It can be very simple. It can be in an email, a bullet point list that we take that, run with it, and we kind of know from there. Other times, for larger companies or potentially more complex companies, it may require us as the architect and the design team to actually go through and survey specific people, specific departments. Maybe it's heads of departments, or maybe it's just a C-suite or just the CEO. And we will actually go through and have sit-down sessions and help get to understand the company, how they operate, what their organizational flow chart is. And we'll even send surveys sometimes where they can send that off to all of their staff to gain some, boots on the ground type of insight for the type of spaces that they need. And then we would help assemble all of that information and kind of make it palatable and understanding, and then present that back to the client. Because that when you first set out, you may not know if you need 2,000 feet or 10,000 feet or 50,000 square feet. So it's okay if you don't know that. It's okay if you do know that. Everyone's in their own position. Just know that the programming piece is really going to be the key part. Even as the broker is starting to look at spaces, they need a general sense of, okay, how big is the space? What type of space? So that's where we'll come in and help kind of have that synergistic relationship with them. So here, there's a snapshot of a law firm. This is basically after assembling all of the surveys and interviews, having several meetings with their design teams. This is what it kind of boils down to essentially. So for this particular client, we had standardized size offices depending on title and position. We were able to simplify, put all of these numbers in place, and essentially get to the hard program requirements that were going to be needed. From there, we start to do our twist on everything. So the programming, it's not just a number, even though it is presented in a spreadsheet. There's a lot of nuances that happen regardless of size of space, even as a small 2,000 or 4,000 square foot space. How a particular company operates and what culture that they want to invoke, that has big impacts during this programming phase. So I'm showing here a bubble diagram where we as architects would start to play with adjacencies, sizes, layouts to try to make sure that we're really honing in on what's going to work best for your space. So that may mean 2 particular departments that we find out have to be next to each other. Accounting has to be next to the corporate suite so that they're able to interact and keep things confidential, or, just as an example. That's a critical adjacency that we need to make sure we're maintaining as we start laying out the space. And that's going to influence how we do lay out your fit plan. So we'll start to get into that, and we'll work through several different iterations. So on the left side of the screen, you can see a color-coded actual fit plan, which is what we call it. So space planning, fit plan, that's basically all what we're looking at here. We would typically color code those so you're able to, at a quick glance, understand what departments or what quantities are being shown in the plan. Not everybody can read plans. Too often, architects, I think we take it for granted that I look at a floor plan, I know exactly what's going on. 85% of people can't really comprehend, or at least initially, a floor plan. So there's no misconceptions with that. It's very common. So I definitely, if you're ever in a position where you're not understanding a floor plan or a layout or what you're looking at, please make sure you're speaking up with whoever you're working with and make sure they kind of clarify it with you. So we'll go through several iterations here and start to make sure we're ticking all the boxes that you need for program and office culture. And as we go through, what you'll find is what we find often is in working with your broker, we will actually be looking at, let's say, 3 different buildings at the same time, because you want to make sure you're getting the right space. So as we work through the programming phase with you, we find out all those requirements, and then we say, okay, we've landed at 10,000 feet. We need office space. The broker goes out and says, okay, look, I have these 3 options. You go and tour them all. The architect gets the fit plan, and we start to fit plan and lay you out in all of the different scenarios in the 3 different buildings. Because as you can see here, 3 very different shaped buildings. One could be brand new, one could be 100 years old. They could have all different requirements and offerings for you. So those are the things that we would start to present to you. Say, here's how you would fit out in building A. Here's what works and what doesn't work. Here's how you would fit out in building B. This is what's great. This is what's not great. And you would be able to kind of slowly digest that and work through the pros and the cons. A lot of this is going to then dovetail into your lease negotiations and establishing your terms. So we'll get into, on the next slide, kind of pros and cons of different types of spaces. So as you are working with your broker to look at spaces, this is a simplification of 3 potential deals that are pretty typical in the industry. So a new shell fit out is basically either a ground up building, if you have the budget or the time and the need for that, or it could be an existing building that was already built by someone else and you would be one of the first tenants in. So there's basically just walls, core walls and shafts, and then everything else you would be able to build out. The second option would be a second generation space. So let's take any mid-rise office building downtown. The building has been there. There's been plenty of turnover. It's already an office space, but it will likely require some modifications in order to accommodate your specific needs. And then the last condition would be a turnkey condition, where a landlord in a building has already fit out an office space. It's, according to their building standards, it's ready to go. All you have to do is they hand you the key after you sign the deal and it's move-in ready. Those are 3 typical scenarios that you will be coming across as you're working through the fit planning with your broker and your architect. And so here are some pros and cons to each of those. For a new shell fit out, the great side is you are able to tick all the boxes that you need. Any good architect is going to be able to say, we basically have a blank slate. We can give you exactly what you need and customize it to make sure it's perfect for you. Obviously, as a con, that comes at a cost. The cost of the fit outs from a new shell building are getting more and more astronomical compared to a second generation type of space. So sometimes it's necessary, depending on the client's needs, for a particular warehouse space, or if they are trying to build a new headquarters, let's say, it may just be a requirement, and that may be what they're looking for. Another one of the pros would be efficiency of the building itself. If it is a newer building, it's going to have better heating and cooling. It's going to have lesser utility bills. It's going to have better improved utilities and thermal comfort for your staff. So everything is basically brand new, and it's going to be as efficient and as optimal as possible. The other thing with a lot of new buildings are the building amenities that are now offered. So the newer the office building, the closer they are basically to knowing the needs of Class A office space in 2025 or whatever the year is. So a good example would be more and more new office buildings are providing shared amenities with meeting rooms, oversized conference room, boardrooms that you're able to book out, cafeterias, all of those type of building amenities that may lessen the burden on your space. So you don't have to dedicate, you know, 1,000 square feet of rentable square footage towards having all hands meeting once a quarter. Instead, you can keep your space smaller, but pay a premium on your rent, knowing that you're able to book the larger conference room that the building has on the second floor, let's say. So newer shell buildings are always very dialed in with a lot of the amenities that they have, both in terms of their offerings and also the condition, looking and feeling and operating as well as they can. A couple of the other cons, the inherent risk. There is a lot of risk if you are doing a new ground up type building. It's just a longer process. There's more that could go wrong. It's a little bit riskier because it's more upfront cost. So there is risk associated with that. Timeline also goes hand in hand with that. It could require more time to actually construct, fit out, and build the space. And then the rental rates are going to be impacted. A brand new shell space is built off of having a certain rent rate. So you may not have as much negotiating power when it comes to your broker trying to sit at the table and negotiate with you. The terms are going to be a little bit more stringent potentially. In the scenario of a second generation space or a space that's already an office building, there's been a previous tenant there, but their lease has gone up. So now you're potentially looking to move in. Some of the pros are a lot of the infrastructure and the utilities are already set in stone. They're already in place. So that means less cost for your build out. It's easier to work with and it's less time. It's less upfront investment. So if you know that your focus is going to be more long-term and you don't necessarily have the cash or the financing upfront initially, a second generation space would be a lot more appropriate for you than trying to take on a bigger burden that may really hurt your bottom line as a younger company. A pro could be kind of compromised. It's kind of the best of both scenarios. You're not paying top dollar, but you're not also, but you do have some customization. You may come in and you may have to build out 5 new offices, but you don't have to build out 50 new offices. So there's a middle ground in there that could be just right. It helps keep the cost down and allows you some of that flexibility. The downside could also be compromise. You are not getting exactly everything that you need, knowing that you're reusing some existing infrastructure, walls, millwork, appliances, whatever it may be. You are going to be compromising, so that could potentially have a downside as well to an upside. And then there's also, with existing space, there's always discovering unknowns. So as we start to open up walls and we do some demolition, nobody has X-ray vision, so we can only know as much as we know of what we see and verify. So you may have some hiccups along the way potentially, whereas a new shell building, everything you see is what's there, and there's really no guesswork. All right, last it would be the turnkey scenario, and this is the simplified version. The best pro of this is basically it's ready now. If you are in an absolute hurry and you know that you need 5,000 square feet of space, this landlord already has a suite that's been recently updated. It's ready to go. You just agree to the terms and then you're ready to move in. You're ready to mobilize as soon as you can get your furniture in there. So that would be the ideal scenario for someone whose timeline is very tight. You also have less hassle to deal with. So it's not an easy process going through construction and building out office space. Depending on your professionals, it can certainly still be enjoyable and be a positive experience, but it's not an easy one. So if for a turnkey deal, the landlord is taking on all that burden before you're even in the mix. So you don't have to deal with any of that. You basically come in, you're ready to go and ready to open your doors. And then because of that, they kind of know what they know what they've already spent to fit out and renovate the space. So the terms of the deal can oftentimes be a lot more simplified because they built it off of a certain rate or pro forma that they had to meet. So they know in order to cover what they need, they have to get at least this much rent. So sometimes it can be a lot more simple of a deal. Downside, you have no input, no customizability, basically. So what you see is what you get. You have to move in as is. Obviously, you can kind of tweak, artwork and furniture and implement some of those things to help make it your own. But you will not, if you have more specialized demands based on your operations or your business, this really may not be the best fit for you. The other piece is you're beholden to the existing infrastructure. So you don't really have a say in the heating and cooling or how things are designed and implemented. That's already kind of set in stone. All right, so as you work through, sorry. So as you work through that, you're going back and forth with us. We worked on a couple fit plans. You consider all the options, and your broker helps get you a great deal. And you've settled on a space that you like, a building that you like. You know what kind of space. Now the fun part kind of starts to begin for both the design team and often the clients as well, where we start to help you identify the fit and finish. If you have a brand in place already, we like to have conversations with you about what you want your office culture to be. How are you attracting talent? How do you need to operate on day to day? What is going to make your company succeed? So we start to put together visuals, materials, renderings to really help showcase the space. And it's an iterative process. There's always a lot of back and forth, as there is with all of these steps in the process. So make sure that you're really engaged at this part of the process to make sure you get the most out of it, because we only know what you kind of tell us and give us. So we really heavily rely on a good relationship and a good rapport to make sure we're help building out the fit and finish that ultimately you're looking for. And even beyond that, it can extend all the way down to furniture. Sometimes you will have existing furniture maybe that you're bringing over, or there may already be existing furniture in the tenant space. Or sometimes you may be responsible for bringing over your own furniture, which in the commercial realm, it can be very, very cumbersome. And it's a very costly item too, just to purchase, new professional grade commercial office furniture. So we have the ability to help you navigate that process, assemble a spec, get pricing, and make the right decision on that piece as well. And ultimately, the furniture does have a big impact on the overall functionality and feel and look of your space. So it is a critical step. From there, then we kind of put our heads down and get to work. This is where we now step into the construction document phase, or what we would call the CD phase. This is where the architect starts to engage with the engineers, the interior designers. We basically have all hands on deck. Now that we know all the criteria that we have to meet, we know what the design is going to be. Now we actually need to start executing it and assembling all of the documentation, the design, the drawings that are going to ultimately help get this thing built. So we start working through millwork details, code information. There's a lot of back and forth and coordination across each of the disciplines. So you have to figure out what type of heating and cooling system you're going to have, where the unit's going to be located. We help deal with all this behind the scenes. So if you are dealing with an architect, at this point, we may kind of go quiet a little bit while we put our heads down and really start to hammer through all of these details. The front end is where it's very, very interactive and collaborative, and it's still collaborative at this phase, certainly, but this is more decisions that we make as professionals behind the scene that aren't necessarily directly influenced by the information that you have, because we kind of have a good understanding of what you need at that time. So we'll assemble all of this and make sure that everything's coordinated, accurate to what needs to be done. And then this is the package that's basically used to help get contractors interested and help pricing the project. And this is some of the technology. I put this slide in here just so you kind of are privy to what that can be. There is obviously a lot of new technology out there that helps us generate these construction documents and even on the design side of things. So now we can do three-dimensional scans. There's virtual reality walkthroughs that can be done for certain clients as they need it. And now there's certain AI tools, obviously, that help generate some solutions and quicker renderings. So there's a whole myriad solutions that we use or tools that we have in our toolkit to help us execute that. Okay, so I'm going to pause now, and this is where we're going to see where we are in the timeline of everything. So here's that same graphic that kind of walks you through the entirety of the process. And here I've started to assemble some very high level general timeframes just to help give you a sense of what's required. So at each of these phases, up above is kind of the duration. So the due diligence phase, I have a broad spectrum here of 4 to 10 weeks. That is, it really depends on how many different spaces and buildings you're going to have, how long the lease negotiations take. So there's a lot of moving parts that could really impact that number. But in general, it's going to take at least about a month, a couple months to really hone in on the space that you need, depending on your complexities. And a lot of times, even the lease negotiation and signing itself can take a month just because it sits with legal teams and there's edits and back and forth. So 4 to 10 weeks, that's a very, generous hold for that. The fit planning phase, that could take certainly 3 weeks or so. There's going to be a lot of back and forth there where we're going to present a fit plan. You're going to say, I like this, I don't like this. We'll go back, revise it, and edit it. So it's a very hands-on, and it's going to take some time. Then the construction document phase that I just alluded to, that can take anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks for more simple interior type projects, or it can take 4 months if it's more of a ground up new headquarters construction type of building or a warehouse. It can be a lot more involved in that, but in general, let's assume it's more of a simple tenant interior fit out type of project. CDs could take 4 to 6 weeks. Then as you go into actually get the project built, that's going to take another 10 to 20 weeks. Again, this is through the lens of a more simple interior project. If it's a ground up building, that's going to be much longer. That could take a year, year and a half, depending on seasons and size and footprint and complexity. But even in a best case scenario, simple interior type project, it could take anywhere from 10 to 20 weeks to have that actually built out. Then you actually have to move into the space, you troubleshoot, you bring in all your furniture, your computers, your IT gets set up. You may have hiccups, so that's another week or two, and that helps you get everything kind of closed out. So very, very broad, generally speaking, you're about 40 weeks potentially or 10 months out. The reason I wanted to have this slide in there just as a general gut check is to know that if you wake up today and start to realize, hey, I need more space or I need different space, I need to define this, it could be a very long time from that first day till you're actually operating and moved into that space. So it's definitely something that doesn't happen overnight. There's certainly scenarios where it can be more expedited, like in that turnkey scenario we just talked about, but it is a long, long process. So again, you have to have that foresight to know not only what's right in front of you as you're building up your business, but where are you going to be in 1 year, because that's really when you're actually going to be opening. And to kind of compound that, one of the other pieces is the permitting or the public entitlements. That can range anywhere from 1 to 5 months, depending on your locality, new building versus an existing building. There's a lot of parameters there, but that'll just stretch things out even more. And really, this is one thing that you're not really in control of. The city of Cleveland could take anywhere from 4 to 8 weeks just to review a very simple set of drawings. So make sure you're factoring all that into your overall timeline of when you need to be operational. Okay, so we talked timing a little bit. Now we're going to talk budget-wise and some of the financial side of things of what to keep in mind as you're going through this whole process. Some of the things to keep in mind, which we've touched on a little bit already, some of those critical decisions are already made for you as you decide what space to move into. So even if you keep your build out cheaper, depending on whether you decide on first or second generation space, that's going to have a big impact on your bottom line. The location that you decide could also have a big impact on your bottom line. Are you adamant that you need to be in the central business district in a high-rise building, or can you function properly or well enough in a suburban office building? Because those are two very different price points potentially, depending on what market you're in. Again, building amenities, are those important to you and your office culture and the needs that you have for your staff? If so, it's going to come at a cost. If not, you can maybe go to different areas that don't necessarily, or different buildings that don't necessarily offer some of these amenities, and that'll keep your bottom line and your rent rate a lot lower. Another thing to keep in mind would be hard costs and soft costs. So this is a new term that we're first mentioning here in the presentation, but hard costs and soft costs, I have a slide on, and it's basically the cost of construction and all the physical goods that you have, and the soft costs would be all of the fees that are associated with architects, designers, brokers, and all of the, non-tangible fees that go into opening a new office space. The tenant improvement allowance, again, another term here that's often abbreviated as TIA. Tenant improvement allowance is something that your broker will help negotiate with the landlord of the building. So as you work through, they may be able to negotiate a rent rate, but then they'll also negotiate on your behalf that the landlord is going to provide $50,000 in TIA money for you to use up front. So basically, instead of 20 bucks for rent, 20 bucks a square foot for rent, you're going to get charged 22 bucks a square foot for rent, but the landlord's going to give you 50 grand up front to put towards your office renovation. You may go above and beyond that, and you have to come out of pocket for that. But those are things as you're weighing the options of what building to go into and what landlord to go with, the TIA that allowance may have big impacts on the decision that you make. Change orders are other things that basically are going to come up that are kind of unknown costs. So when you get to a certain point, you say, okay, my build out's going to cost X. It's always going to be X plus 10% or 20% potentially, because there's always unknowns that are going to come up that you want to be prepared for. You don't want to stretch yourself too thin and, maximize your budget too early and then be out of luck as it goes sideways. The other thing, the rule of thumb note that I have on here, the biggest way, the more square footage is more cost. So that's the advantage of really honing in on the programming phase and having accurate data there is if you can get away with 5,000 feet instead of 6,000 feet, that has drastic impacts on your overall spend. The easiest way to control your budget is square footage, whether it's a new building or a new fit out, just an interior wise. That always has big impacts. So you don't want to just willy-nilly say, okay, well, I'll take 10,000 feet because it's going to come at a cost. All right, so now that we are starting to understand the team that we've assembled and where we're at, we're going to be adding to the team now. So we've gotten all the way through construction drawings. So you've paid your architecture team and they've assembled a full kit of parts, a full set of drawings that you're able to go and put out into the world and get pricing for to see how much is it going to cost to build out what I need. And so that's where you will go through a general contractor. Now there's two simplified versions that are basically out there for when you engage with a general contractor. The most historically typical and traditional is what we call a design bid build. And that's when it's a very linear process where, as we've described to this point, you work with an architect, they develop a design, they develop all of the drawings, and then you take that and you bid that to multiple different contractors to see who's going to give you the best, most competitive cost that's most accurate to the drawings. So that's the design side. Then you bid it out. You select one of those 2 to 4 contractors that you bid it out to, and then they will build it. That's the most typical historically. More recently, what's becoming more popular is what we call a design build relationship, where the architect and general contractor are essentially brought on at the same time. So you have a general contractor that you've already committed to at the same time as you're committing to the architect. And the advantage that brings is it starts to simplify the process and give you more information earlier on in the process. So some pros and cons that compare the two. A design bid build, you get the advantage of competitively testing the market. So you're going to go out and whoever is looking for work the most, let's say, is going to give you the most aggressive pricing because they know they want to work on this job. Somebody who may be really busy may put a higher number on it. You're able to kind of competitively get a gut check on the pricing that you're getting for everything. Now, the risk is at the time of design, when the architect is going through the whole process, all of the pricing is unknown at that point. You know, the architect, a lot of the responsibility falls on the A&E team to make sure they're making decisions that align with your expectations because they're going to have monetary impacts long term. With the design build, the pro is you have your contractor already awarded before the architect starts designing everything. So they're able to commit to a general budget or cost or help, give insight to the architect saying, hey, don't do this because it's going to end up costing them 2x. Instead, do it this way and you can help save a lot of costs. So that's the advantage of having the design build. The downside of the design build is there is a lack of competition. So you have to know and trust your contractor at that point because you're committing to them early on. So if they're Joe Schmo and they don't necessarily have a good reputation and you're not privy to them, you're already committed to them and you could be in a tough position down the road. So design build makes the most sense when you have a contractor that's highly recommended, one that you trust, one that your architect trusts and has a relationship with and that has worked with. And then they're able to help guide you through that process. And you'll know more costs earlier on in the process, which is better for everybody. So in the bid scenario, the design bid build scenario, what we would do is we would take our contract documents, our construction documents, our CDs, and we would send those out to 2 to 4 contractors to kind of gauge interest. Anything more than that is a little bit excessive. And if you only go to 1 or 2, you may not be able to identify the outliers. So 3 is really the sweet spot. So typically we say 2 to 4 contractors. And so what we will do is they will all submit their pricing. And then as the architect or as your owner's rep or your project manager, we will assemble kind of a side-by-side comparison of the bids of all the different GCs, which you kind of have a sample here of what that looks like. What that allows us to do is to what we call, compare apples to apples to make sure that each contractor is interpreting the drawings the same way and that they're pricing everything the same way. So what we typically do would be we would compare and highlight what we feel is high or low in any particular category. So each of the categories that you see on the left side are the construction breakdown. They're kind of CSI terms. It's basically how all bids are typically structured based on different trades like HVAC and plumbing and painting. All of those are itemized in their own category. So you're able to compare here. Okay, somebody is holding $50,000 for glass, and the next guy is carrying $90,000 for glass. Okay, so why is there that big discrepancy there? And so you can have some interaction with your contractors to help identify inconsistencies to make sure that you're comparing everything apples to apples and making it level as possible. So when you hear bid leveling, you're basically comparing all the bids to making sure that they're accurate to one another. And then from there, you would look to actually award the contractor based on qualifications, because it's not only low bid. Somebody can undercut it and they may be missing scope and hit you with a change order later, or they may not have a good reputation or experience level. So those are all factors that you need to make sure you're considering, and your architect is able to help guide you through that process and give you input on who you should or should not consider when you're going to award. So what that gives you is your construction budget, not to be confused with the project budget. The construction budget is really just the cost of building out the project itself, but there's a lot of other costs that sometimes people may or may not factor in. So a boiled down version would be if you buy a new house, if you maximize your budget to buy that new house, you move in and the first thing you have to do is you have to spend another 10, 20 grand on furniture, accessories. You got to fill up the house with stuff that you may not have really factored into your overall budget. So assembling not only a construction budget early on, but also an overall project budget is a very critical decision to your bottom line, to make sure that it's all encompassing. So this is a general example. This is more for a new ground up type building, and it's pretty extreme just to kind of make a point. But the example is, the construction cost from the general contractor is 4.6 million. So you say, okay, I had a $5 million budget. I'm golden. I'm good to go. Once you factor in your FF&E or your furniture, fixtures, and equipment, all of your security cabling, your IT needs, computers, comm room, your phones, all of that type of infrastructure adds up very quick. So after you do that, you have all of your soft costs that are associated with your design fees, permit fees, all of these elements that are outside of the actual construction cost. I mean, in this scenario, it's a bit exaggerated, but it's all the way up to almost 7.5 million. So it can be very, very substantial. Your construction budget is not telling of the whole story of what your costs are. So you want to make sure you're being aware of that very early on in the process. And here's an example just comparing that hard costs versus soft costs and what kind of falls underneath there. Hard costs are just like I saw, things that are just like it sounds, things that are tangible, that are actually built and that are physical assets. That's what the hard cost is. Soft costs would be, more fees or professional services that you're engaging. Those are the items that would fall under that. So as we keep the process going, you've awarded a contractor one way or the other, and now we're under construction. So this is where on the architecture side, this is what we call CA or contract administration. That's where we help represent our client's interests and help monitor the construction process along with the client. The clients do not know and should not, nor, they're not responsible for knowing the ins and outs of the construction industry. That really falls on the architect. So we act as your eyes and ears in the field to make sure that what we design and what we draw for you is actually being built per our design and also per local codes in the field. So some of the factors and terms that you'll see during this CA phase or this construction phase, lead times are a critical piece to the overall timeline of everything. So a good example of this would be as you're bidding the project, the contractor says it's going to cost $1 million and I can get it built in 16 weeks. So you may think, okay, I'm going to be open in 16 weeks. The thing you need to make sure is that there's certain materials or products that may have long lead times that actually push that timeline out. So a critical example would be the rooftop unit, an RTU. A rooftop unit may take 3 months to arrive from the point of order. So if it takes them 2 months to order it, their whole construction timeline has already pushed out. Now, you can obviously navigate that certain ways and start construction. You're not necessarily beholden to every lead time, but those are items that you want to make sure you identify early. If your company has any specific equipment, machinery criteria that is a long lead time, you want to make sure the contractor's aware of that and they're able to sequence the trades to make sure everything aligns well with the overall timeline. Next up, submittals and RFIs or request for information. That's what an RFI is. These are items that the architect reviews from the contractor during construction. So as they're working through construction, they may find something doesn't align properly. So they would submit an RFI to the architect to say, hey, this condition in the field varies slightly from what you had drawn. How do you want me to resolve this issue? And so that's why the architecture is still in tow on your behalf during construction to answer it and make sure that you give them the right answer. They're also doing submittals, which is if I call for a certain paint spec or a certain rooftop unit, they are submitting a specification to me that's confirming they are going to purchase and provide exactly what we called for. So it's kind of a last minute gut check to make sure everything that's being ordered is what is designed and desired. During this phase, you'll also start to mobilize the consultants and a lot of your vendors. So we alluded to before the FF&E, the furniture, fixtures, and equipment. As construction is underway, you need to start engaging your furniture vendor to make sure they're aware, hey, construction is going to be complete in 8 weeks. We need to make sure we have all of our furniture ordered and delivered in time, and then it needs to land on site exactly at the right time so that you're able to open business exactly when you plan for it. And there's a bunch of different consultants all the way down to artwork, IT, you have to call Spectrum for your cable needs or coax needs. So a lot of different vendor coordinations that, again, as the architect, we can help navigate that, or an owner's rep or a project manager can help the client navigate those and tee all those things up. Another term you may hear during this process is OAC meetings, or owner, architect, contractor. So it's basically all hands on deck types of meetings that'll often happen once a week or once every 2 weeks, depending on the complexity of the project. Again, this is where you're busy building your company. You may want to have an owner's rep or an architect just act on your behalf during this phase to keep you privy of any critical decisions, but not necessarily to bog you down. So that's basically, again, just another gut check that happens on a weekly basis to make sure everything is going well and smoothly. Change orders and pay apps, those are kind of contract items between the owner and the general contractor. So if there's deviations in the field, or if you decide halfway through construction you want to move a TV, or you want to shift things around or make changes to the design for any reason, that may act as a change order. So you had already awarded the contractor $1 million, you request a change, and now they're going to have to add another $20,000 to the contract. So they amend the contract, and you would help sign that off. An architect can help offer our guidance and review of those to make sure that what they are pricing is valid, it's an accurate price, and it's also not already covered by something that's in the drawings. So you want to have the architect act on your behalf during that phase as well. And a pay app is just confirmation of payment to the contractor. So that contract ends up being $1 million. You don't have to pay them, obviously, the $1 million all at one time. They'll issue a pay app every month as they progress through construction. An architect will review that pay app to make sure the work that has been executed to date aligns with the amount of money that they're charging you at that point in time. And then we can help sign off and release that payment. And that's what goes through the bank and the contract there with the legal team. Then as you get closer to construction end, you will start to coordinate your final move, and you're obviously going to have to, disconnect from where you're currently located and reconnect at your new location. So you need to make sure you have all the infrastructure in place, you have all your furniture in place. Ideally, that's going to happen over the weekend so that you're not missing critical business time. So you'll disconnect your current office on a Friday. Over the weekend, you'll get everybody moved in and all the infrastructure hooked up. And then Monday morning, you'll turn on your computer and be operating like nothing changed in an ideal scenario. So there's a lot of coordination that goes into that piece as well. Change management is a term where if you have a lot of staff that's currently in a office space with a particular environment, and your new office build out is going to be drastically different, you may have a change management system in place that helps educate them on why things are different, how things are laid out, and the reasoning behind them. Because a lot of times you'll be met with some contention. Naturally, a lot of people don't like change. So when they have to go from one office space to another office space and it's different, there can be a lot of complaints or issues. So what a lot of companies will do is they'll actually try to get ahead of it, and they'll put together a whole presentation or a package that gets people excited, tells them why it's so great that this new office space is going to be in place and why they're going to be there and why it's going to be so great for them. And that helps counteract some of the negative aspect that people have associated with change. And then lastly, quasi jokingly, but also seriously, it can be very stressful. There's a lot of unknowns. It's a long process. There's always hiccups. Nothing ever goes perfect. So it can be very stressful, but at the end of the day, it all pays off, and it's worth it. It can be fun, and it's like anything else. Anything that's worthwhile takes a lot of work and stress, and at the end of the day, you can get a nice, beautiful space like some of the projects that we've done here. So it is worth it. And ultimately, when you get the right team assembled, they're able to deliver for you. There's nothing better than making sure your office and your culture is what you're looking for. So that's really the end of kind of what I have. This is a quick snapshot and kind of synopsis of some of the things that we've covered, so that you can kind of use this maybe as like a cheat sheet if you're ever looking to get started on the process again. Hopefully this helps give a general consensus of what we've reviewed. Again, the general process: you assemble the team, you identify your program, you establish the budget, and then you start getting your timeline figured out so you know that when you have to be open, you will be open. And these are all kind of the checkpoints along the way. And from there, there's just a recap again of some of the terms that we've reviewed, that we've talked about. Hopefully they make a little bit more sense now and have a little bit more context behind everything. If not, I'm more than happy to answer specific questions about terms or any situations that anybody's in right now. And this will be circulated after the fact as well. So you'll kind of have this whole slide deck presentation as a takeaway that you can kind of use as a prompt moving forward. So thank you again for everybody. Hopefully you found it valuable. Again, I am here for questions now. If you want to put anything in the chat, or if there's been anything in the Q&A. If anything comes up down the road too, I'm certainly only a call or an email away. You'll have my contact information. We're more than willing to kind of help and give guidance, because we love what we do and we're passionate about it, so we like to help.